Listen now to the French President Emmanuel Macron also speaking there at the end of this G7 summit.
Le Premier ministre japonais a pu, à l'issue de nos réunions, présenter le programme. Évidemment, ce G7
of their program at the G7, we had many discussions
en format G7 avec les différents pays qui nous ont
with the different
rejoints,
countries that have joined us as well as guests. And this morning, we, as every day, of course, we talked about the war in the Ukraine, and we all agree about our democratic values, which we share. And what comes out of the discussion here is that it's not the West against the rest of the world, it's really the camp of peace against the camp of war. And Russia should not be allowed to win this war. We are supporting Ukraine, and the sanctions against Russia will be maintained as long as needed with the necessary intensity over weeks and months. Of course, we have learned yesterday afternoon that there was this new attack in Kremenchuk on a shopping mall, and we all condemned this new war crime, which is atrocious. It's a new proof of evidence, once again, that the Russian army is using methods which are stunning and attack even civilians, and should be condemned by international justice. We have put together a plan to coordinate our support to Ukraine, to start with, so that they can defend themselves. We've had exchanges with President Zelensky for coordination of the mission of support, with humanitarian support and new commitments, so that the country can go on supporting their war situation. So extra budgets, as you know, that we'd already decided on 9 billion euro, on top of what has been decided bilaterally. And all these themes means that France has already mobilized 2 billion of commitments, which I had confirmed in Warsaw a few weeks ago. Then, with my exchanges with President Zelensky, we have also discussed reconstruction and to have a European platform so that there is a good coordination of the initiatives between European and non-European countries. The G7 has been an opportunity to organize this effort for reconstruction. The war is far from being over, but where those who came with me to Yerpin saw that there's also a plan for reconstruction to be prepared. When we went to Kiev and to the surrounding areas, we realized all the amount of destruction. The G7 wants to prepare against the effects of compounded consequences of the war, which are inflation, the shock on our economies, the increase of prices of food and fuel, the slowdown of our economies. All this is of much concern in the countries of the G7, and even worse in the emerging countries. And this is what yesterday's discussion showed. We need to find some responses to the consequences of the war, so that we can help our populations live through the phase until the war is over, which might be a long one. And we must fight against destabilization undertaken by Russia, and the temptation of some of the states to fall on the wrong side. Our discussions with Argentina, Senegal, South Africa yesterday was very interesting. We were able to move forward in common will to find some mechanisms to move forward. As regards our macro and financial policies, yesterday, concerning this theme, we realized that we need to move with consultation and coordination for the budgetary policies, and the situation in North America and in Europe are quite different. There's a difference between the situation of supply and demand balances is different, and there are some economies which need to be helped out of the pandemic also. So the macro budgetary and financial policies have to take care of different types of inflation, maintaining jobs or creating jobs, maintaining the stability of economies, and this in a geopolitical context which I have already described. As regards the more fragile economies of the developing and emerging countries, that is even more urgent to find the right response. You remember that in May last year, France had held a summit on financing African economies, and that was done together with IMF to relieve them of some debts and allow some DTSs to be given to the poorest countries, special drawing rights, and this has been reported about at the G7, and we realized that the promises were held and the pledges for support were given. But we need to step this up, as the head of IMF was saying yesterday when she explained that it was important to allot even more the work between the G20 of Rome and the G7 last year must be maintained and increased. We need to move from 27 to 30% because there are many challenges in many countries, particularly emerging countries such as Indonesia. So we'll be working together with IMF, and I wanted to say that France was part of this initiative for this indispensable aid that must be given to the more vulnerable countries. As regards energy, the second pillar of our work, we also tried to find a common response. And this is capital during these times. First, of course, fossil fuel has gone up, gas particularly, and that hits all our countries. It's an asymmetrical shock because several European countries have a bigger gas expenses, depend more on the Russian gas, and because of the energy transition, that's the only solution, the energy transition. And it is still our big task in the future years. Our objective is to reduce the effects of the crisis for all our citizens and be able to restore a better balance on the energy market. Many initiatives were launched which now need to be worked out in their practical consequences. We want to have better coordination of buyers on regarding their purchases from the producers, and we want to liberate more volumes, but at the same time have a discussion, concerted discussion between the big buying countries so that we can maintain the prices of the crude. Of course, I could also give some more detail about this price mechanism, but this is the first level of our discussion, and it will have to be worked out during the months to come. Of course, when President Biden goes to the Gulf in a few weeks' time, this will, or a few days, this will also come up again and lead to more work. So we need to work on alternative flows compared to the Russian gas. We need to work on alternative low low-carbon production of electricity. This is part of our climate objectives, and we need to be less dependent on Russia. So we have the nuclear and renewable energies as solutions. And I want to support the efforts of the International Energy Agency to support their efforts and the acquisition of licenses, and as we did for health problems, we'll support the COP27 objectives with the International Energy Agency and energy transition, so that we intensify our cooperation. We also need to support a transition with our large partners by following the guidelines of Glasgow, so that we can give up coal and move through nuclear towards renewables, which I think there's this progression, because the worst is coal. Then, secondly, we have gas, which is not so good, and nuclear is better because it is the only source of energy which is continuous energy production. And then we have the renewables, which have one problem, is that they are intermittent. They cannot yet produce continually. So we've had a debate with our partners, and I think there's a dual necessity that we agree upon. First, we have to increase the investment for everybody to have access to energy, and include in our strategy that we still have 600 million households with no energy source for the time being, and they need to be helped to have access. And this is the first aim, and we're working with some projects such as with South Africa, with Senegal, and many other partners. Beyond this, we want to hold our objectives for 2050. Then, apart from energy subjects, we also have the food problem. That's the third pillar, and the third big area of destabilization today, and compounded by the war. France has announced that it will double its effort by increasing it to 700 million euros. And this is part of all the new commitments of the G7. We want to pursue our action in this field. It's a necessity. We started right after the first, when the war started. We did this with the farm program, and when Senegal was the president of the African Union, that's when we started this initiative, and it has already led to some concrete results. Initiatives have followed with WHO and etc. We have used these organizations, WTO and others, to put things into place so that we can act on the trade flows and try and avoid the blockages on the international trade flows. The value chain has to be maintained, and we've been fighting against speculation and try and find other sources of supply, so as to satisfy some of as many possible of our countries, so that they have access to food supplies. And we've also worked with the agricultural organizations for production. And under the French presidencies, we've had the EU African Union summit, in which this strategy has been inscribed, so that we all produce produce so that we can produce more protein food on the African continent. And we've done this in keeping with the biodiversity objectives, which also is another mechanism for international support to agricultural and forestry plans from the Gulf of Guinea to the southern point of Africa. This is a consistent initiative which has given us a chance to combat desertification and also improve food safety, particularly for African countries. So we're going to continue this effort, and thank you to the Secretary General of the United Nations, because thanks to him the crops which have been blocked by Ukraine, there's an initiative to release them and to create a corridor through Odessa, and we want to support him entirely. It means that there are negotiations between Russia and Ukraine first, because to release this food mustn't make Ukraine even weaker, but it also involves Turkey, who has a particular role to play for the Black Sea security. And in parallel, we are working to improve crops being released by Romania and Moldova, and we have done this in relation with some exchanges with those two countries. We've improved the transit mechanisms quite substantially, because usually it's 5 million tons a month that can leave Odessa, but in April it was 1.2 million, then 1.7, and now we've managed to push it up to 2 million tons thanks to mobilization that was applied. And the challenge to free those volumes of cereal that is freed for the rest of the world means that we really have to use our storage possibilities to the fullest. And there are also other world challenges. There's the world health situation. We've committed to release more than 1 billion vaccines, and we've done this, and we've helped for the production of vaccines, particularly to produce them in Africa. So we've stepped up on regards that commitment with Senegal and South Africa. I don't know whether you remember, I went there a year ago to lay the cornerstone of a new production of vaccines on African ground, and now it's happening. Now Africans can buy their own, some vaccines that are produced in Africa and not in European laboratories. And that was necessary. And during the crisis, we've helped primary health systems where necessary. We've also we're working on the Convention for Land and Sea, and we're also working in the digital world. The Christchurch and the Paris Agreement for Intelligence, Artificial Intelligence, which we committed to. Next September, I intend to go with Reporters Without Borders to support their initiative to fight against disinformation in all the countries of the world. And at the United Nations, we'll work again on this IPCC of information and disinformation. So that was, in a nutshell, trying to cover as much ground as possible, but yet not completely exhaustive, the answer that I brought to your questions about the G7. Questions? Hello. You said a war was not over. Does it mean that you think it's illusory that there should be that Zelensky's hopes at the G7 of the war ending at the end of the year? Do you think that's an illusion? And secondly, he said if the troops, the Ukrainian troops, had to stop war, then the war could stop in one day. What do you think of this statement of Putin, and particularly with the NATO summit tomorrow? Well, first, I think we should pay tribute to the Ukrainian president's courage and to the courage of his whole people. When he gives himself the objective of the end of the year, you see that we've already been through 4 months of war, and the end of the year is quite far, and it means a lot. I mean, nobody can say whether the war would finish in a few weeks' time. That's hardly possible, but we hope that by the end of the year there'll be good results. But the only certainty is that we don't want Russia to win. And as regards Putin, and when he says, maybe I should clarify what he said more precisely. For a long time, he was very ambiguous. At the beginning of the conflict, he wasn't very clear, and he talked about the borders with Belarus. But now his aggression has an objective. He wants Ukraine to surrender. Well, that's not a negotiation, and we shall go on applying the sanctions. We shall go on supporting Ukraine and its people, either to get a full victory, or if there are terms of negotiation which the Ukrainians agree to undertake a negotiation and support the results of their choices. And I don't think we should give in to further verbal intimidation. Süddeutsche question.
Bonjour. My French is not so good, so I would say in English. You talked a lot about the nutrition crisis, and so my question is, how deep are the concerns that this crisis in Africa and in the Middle East could really escalate the crisis with high food prices and the hunger crisis?
Je pense qu'il y a plusieurs.
I think there are several questions there, because first you've talked about the price increase, and this is fueled by different elements. First, the world destabilization in the value chain and the production chain for farmers. They can't get their grains out, and that is not only for food but also for feed. And then there's the scarcity of the necessary inputs, fertilizers, which aren't getting to the places in Africa or in Southeast Asia or everywhere where there's a strong dependency on the type of fertilizers which are produced by Russia or Belarus or Ukraine. And then there's speculation. Never forget that. When you look at the world price evolution, you see that there are people who are making a lot of money, and much too much, in fact. And we absolutely have to find a way to answer that. First, we have to free the grains out of Ukraine, and no European or American sanction has touched upon food. Let me say that. There are no food restrictions. Secondly, in the weeks to come, we must find some technical solutions for the fertilizers that are needed by some countries to produce the food must be produced elsewhere, so that the people who were using the SWIFT system before must be re-included, so that we can channel the fertilizers at the right places, or find some compensation between various markets. This this has to be worked upon. There's an easy answer to that. And then the Ukrainian production won't be the same afterwards. I don't know what their export capability will be, but we are in any case destabilized on the world level. There are many prices that are going to be destabilized. First, because of problems of access to food for many groups of the world population. So right from the beginning, we set up this monitoring system for the food flows in the world, and we need to move what we produce or what we produce extra towards the population who most need it. And we have a system which is a monitoring and fast response system. We then, because prices are going up in those countries, and it causes a political stress. 10 years ago, the Arab Springs happened because of people's anger about the cost of bread and its enormous increase. So let's not forget that, whether in the Middle East, Africa, or elsewhere, or Caucasian countries, we have to watch it. And those are the short-term consequences, and this is what we're trying to do. It's the farm initiative, which we've launched, and all the other initiatives. We're going to have another summit in Rome in a few days' time with FAO to discuss the food channels and flows. And we want to make sure that there are no famines which are starting because of flows being cut off, and then avoid over-storing in stockpiling in some countries, and target our production and move them towards the countries who need it most. And this is why we have to also involve the question of the fertilizer.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. On a réalisé à l'occasion de ce sommet
we
qu'il était
realized
parfois difficile de se mettre d'accord
at
sur
this
le
summit
processus
that
de
it wasn't
sanctions,
always easy to agree on sanctions, and the diplomatic process has been completely blocked. But there is a consensus in Western countries and countries fighting for the peace that we have an agreement about having to deliver weapons, and there were some ground-to-air missiles which were delivered, and the Ministry of Defense said that they would deliver also more equipment. Aren't we in a military escalation process? You're going to Madrid to the NATO summit. What could you say about this, about delivering weapons by France? And President Zelensky has asked people to classify Russia among the countries financing terrorism. Do you think this is correct? So first about the situation. It is intensifying, but we're still along the same rules. Since the beginning of the crisis, what we do is we support economically, financially, the Ukrainian people so that they can hold on. Then we support them from the military point of view. And we've already delivered Caesar weapons and armored vehicles, and we've held resistance in the Donbass. And there's something I really want to underline, is that, as President Biden also said, we'll deliver weapons and ammunition to help the people and the army to defend themselves, but not to turn them against other countries. But there's an army out there who's resisting, and we're helping them, and that's what we've said since the beginning, and we're there. We've committed to those deliveries, and France didn't wait for the beginning of the war to happen to support Ukraine. We were the first exporter of weapons to Ukraine, even before it started, and we're still doing it. This is our logic. We're consistent. As regards sanctions, there's a great unity. We have a consultation in Europe, and every time we try and get the agreement of the 27, and after 2 days, we already had the agreement, and this had never happened before as regards sanctions. And at the beginning we were most exposed, but because of petrol, of oil, and we are still united. And as regards classifying Russia as a terrorist country, no, we don't really follow this methodology in France, because we want to be consistent, and right since the beginning of when there were images of Bucha that came through, these are war crimes. We condemn war crimes. We've sent some investigators. I even had them with me when I went to Kiev. Gendarmes, magistrates, investigators. They are helping the Ukrainian prosecution, and international justice is going to shed light on all this. So we are sanctioning Ukraine, and we sanction Russia, and we don't need any special qualifications to apply those sanctions. And we are helping to find the truth, to qualify totally those war crimes, and to find the author. So we are supporting the Ukrainian justice and the international justice. As regards weapons deliveries, I can't say anything else than what has already been made public, and the extra Caesars which we have committed to. I had committed to deliver 6 extra ones when I was in Kiev, and this is a fact which I can confirm. As regards armored vehicles, we've already delivered them. Question from Stefan Sandwijk for CNPC.
President Macron, thank you very much indeed for taking my question. The global oil markets...
You were listening there to the French president speaking on the closing day of the G7 summit, a meeting dominated by the Ukraine war. Emmanuel Macron says a plan has been put together to coordinate support for Ukraine, adding that Russia can't and must not win this war. He said that no one believes the conflict will end in the coming weeks or months, but Macron is aiming for weapons to be downed by the end of the year. Before the French leader spoke, we also heard from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who said that this summit has come at a critical and an essential moment.